Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today for this incredibly exciting CNIB panel on diabetes treatment and insulin pumps. My name is Thomas Simpson, and I am the Executive Director of Public Affairs and Come to Work at CNIB.
Hello.
Hello. We'll begin today with a land acknowledgement and a few housekeeping items, and then kick it over to our facilitator, Angela Bonfanti. I am located at the CNIB Bayview office in Toronto, and acknowledge the land I am on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I'll ask that each of you think of the traditional territory that you are on and reflect on how each of us can advance truth and reconciliation in our own ways. Before we begin today, a few housekeeping items. We'll ask that each of you stay on mute until a potential Q&A answer session. For those using your computer, Alt-A is a shortcut key to mute and unmute audio, and Alt-Y is the shortcut key to raise and lower your hand. If you're on the phone, that's *6 to mute and unmute, and that's *9 to raise or lower your hand. Today we have a few very exciting panelists today to share their perspective on the state of diabetes treatment, accessibility, with a specific focus on insulin pumps. I'd like to introduce Angela Bonfanti, the Chief Operating Officer for CNIB. Since joining the CNIB team in 2011, Angela has been a driving force behind many of our organization's most transformational achievements for people who are blind and partially sighted. In her role as COO, she is responsible for enhancing our organization's processes, providing strategic and operational oversight over the delivery of our mandate and our mission across Canada. Angela, over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Angela Bonfanti. I am located in Ontario today, and as many of you may know, there is a strike going on that has kept children out of school and therefore in my home. And so if you see or hear a few of them run by, I apologize in advance. There's only so much I can do bribing them with candy. I want to thank our guests here today. I also want to call out our friends Jim Tokos and Louise Gillis from the Canadian Council of the Blind, who have been kind enough to join us today, and their cameras are on. So thanks so much for joining us, Louise and Jim, and to all of you. We're here to talk about insulin pumps today. Over the last 2 years, CNIB has been hearing from Canadians living with diabetes and sight loss who are having difficulty managing their diabetes independently because their insulin pumps are not accessible. End users are unable to administer insulin safely and independently because the device must be navigated using visual features on a display screen. In Canada alone, there are over 750,000 people who live with diabetic retinopathy. We know that diabetic retinopathy is one of the leading causes of blindness in Canada. Yet, insulin pump manufacturers continue to only offer products that rely on visual information. CNIB recently conducted a survey on the accessibility of insulin devices, and the results show us what we unfortunately already know all too well. We cannot wait any longer for accessible insulin pumps. 65% of respondents to that survey reported being fearful of causing self-harm or incorrectly administering insulin. 1 in 5 respondents even said that they had been advised by a manufacturer or a healthcare worker that they should not use certain devices because they are simply unsafe for people who are blind or partially sighted. In partnership with organizations across North America, CNIB is working with manufacturers, regulators, researchers, and healthcare professionals to make sure medicine and technologies are accessible to everyone. We're asking medical associations to work with us to develop best practices in diabetes management for people with sight loss. and we're calling on the Government of Canada to include the accessibility of diabetes management in the Framework for Diabetes in Canada, which was introduced earlier this year. CNIB has launched a petition to the federal government calling on them to work with insulin pump manufacturers to address the safety concerns of insulin pumps and ensure Health Canada includes accessibility assessments in approved medical devices. If we secure 500 signatures, and that can't be, that's each of you here adding your signature plus another 5 or 6 more, the petition will be formally presented before the House of Commons, and the Government of Canada will be required to respond. And so I ask you to please take 2 minutes to add your name to our petition. And we're going to pop that link into the chat at the end of this panel. And my colleague Thomas will be doing that again at the end of the chat. As with any issue relevant to our community, CNIB cannot solve this issue alone, which is why I'm excited that we're bringing together this diverse panel to show their perspectives and offer some solutions. We all own a piece of creating this solution. So with us today, we have the pleasure of having Dr. Steph Habif, Vice President, Behavioral Sciences, Tandem Diabetes Care, Dr. Tyceer Abouhassan, an endocrinologist, and Ryan Hooey, CNIB's Program Lead for Career Support. Let's jump right into it, shall we? Ryan, I'm going to pick on you first. Are you able to unmute?
You got me, yes.
Excellent. Ryan, tell us a little bit about how you've managed your diabetes since losing your sight, maybe what primary challenges you faced, and have you received assistance or advice from healthcare professionals to address them?
Of course. I lost my vision from diabetic retinopathy in 2011. Since then, that was actually the first year that I actually got an insulin pump, and I've been using the same one ever since, which is an issue. If you think of it in terms of using the same cell phone from 2011, probably, not as good as one from this year. All of the new pumps that come out are not accessible to me because they are visual on the screen. There's very little audio kind of information feedback, and that's a big concern. There's no voice, there's no nothing like that. I can't even tell you how much battery life is left in my pump, and that has nothing to do with administering insulin. The way I sort of go about treating my diabetes is I have to sort of work on other people's schedules. For instance, if my family is around, they can kind of help me change my infusion set just a little bit. I can do the physical stuff myself, but the reading the pump screen, not so much. Or, which is a little bit more difficult with the vision loss, is I have to FaceTime call somebody and hold the screen up to the pump screen to say, hey, what does this say? Introducing glare, tipping it back and forth, is the angle right? There's a lot of different things that way. And now there's even the aspect of not really concerning an insulin pump, but also concerns an insulin pump, is testing my glucose and my blood sugar. That has been leaps and bounds, much greater than back in 2011, and is very, very accessible to the day. But now getting that to talk to my insulin pump, getting it to kind of converse and say, hey, Ryan is low or Ryan is high, is a whole different story. So there's been some struggles for sure. And there's always that. I travel a lot for work. If I'm alone and there's no one around, and maybe I'm in a different time zone, who am I going to call? I shouldn't have to call the front desk at a hotel to kind of help me out. That's not their responsibility.
Yeah, Ryan, I think that you hit it on the head. Imagine anyone using technology over 11 years old, and that be life-saving technology. I think that's a really compelling statement. I'm going to pass it over now to our friends in the medical sector. I'm going to start with Dr. Steph Habif. The accessibility of insulin pumps have been a serious issue for years. We just heard from Ryan, one of hundreds of thousands of stories that we're all too aware of. And the barriers that the manufacturers have faced. What are the particular barriers in your view that manufacturers have faced that have prevented the development of a fully accessible solution? And as a follow-up, if I could also ask, what steps have been taken to address these barriers, and perhaps even what could be the next steps into the future?
Thank you so much for that question. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. I'm so happy to have time with you all. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Steph, and I am a behavioral scientist in my role at Tandem Diabetes Care, I serve as the Vice President of Behavioral Sciences, which I've been in that role just for a few years. Before that, the majority of my experience in diabetes was with folks who have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. So to be able to spend some time at this point in my career working on the machines and the technology that we are designing for people who need subcutaneous insulin is something I feel very proud and honored to be able to work on. I would love to talk about your question in a few different ways. So Tandem Diabetes Care is headquartered in San Diego. I'm speaking to you from San Diego, California. And we have had an insulin pump product in market. We brought our first insulin pump product to the US market in 2012. So we just celebrated 10 years. And we first came to Canada in 2018 or 2019. It was right around 2018, 2019 that we started making our pump system available in Canada. And that was right around the time that I assumed my position. And so a few things have been worked on and recognized for me as a practitioner in the past couple of years. The first is the massive opportunities for inclusive design. For instance, we realize that people who live with diabetes and have vision impairment, not everybody's the same and not everybody has the same needs. And so really understanding what it means to set up a company like Tandem Diabetes Care, who manufactures the machines, to be as inclusive as possible. That's one thing that I think is really rising to the top of the list of priorities, not just for Tandem, but for the other diabetes technology companies as well. And one of the reasons that I've been building out a behavioral sciences unit inside of our company is to be able to do this type of work exactly. So the people who are on my team are folks who are trained in behavioral psychology, social and clinical psychology. They're clinical nurses, and they're also folks who specialize in human-computer interaction. And so I like to say our team of behavioral scientists run around the company advocating for the humans using the machines. That's how we spend our time at work. To that end, just to give you an example of what it means to try to develop more practice for inclusive design, this week in San Diego, we are hosting in person several members from the Accessible Insulin Task Force. And they're going to come into our offices and we're going to spend some time with our engineers, with our product makers, with our clinicians, so that we can bridge the gap between our end users, the people we're designing for, and the people making the machines. So this is an example of the type of work we are starting to do more of to make sure we're really clearly operationalizing around unmet needs. The third thing I'd like to mention, companies like ours, we are a regulated medical device company, which means a lot of what we have to do needs to meet the needs of here in the United States, the FDA, and outside of the United States, various international regulatory bodies. And with that comes a lot of requirements. And so one of the things that Tandem's been doing over the past couple of years, which is going to set not only us, but other device makers up to be able to do more of this type of work effectively, is by developing new regulatory pathways for clearing these devices so that they can be in the hands of end users. So for instance, the CGM companies developed a new regulatory pathway, which we call iCGM, interoperable CGM. And Tandem was the company that forged ahead to create a new regulatory category, which we call ACE, which stands for alternate controller device, right? An iACE pump. And so if we can create a regulatory landscape where these devices can be interoperable together, it removes some of the barriers that come along with clearing a device for end users to be able to use. So that now I want you to imagine a world where you can choose the CGM that works best for you. You can choose the insulin pump that works best for you. You can choose the smartphone or the meter or some of the other devices that go into especially automated insulin delivery. Now that we're getting into the land of automation, how might we increase choice for people to choose the machines and the types of devices that work best for them? And there's no reason we can't look to voice automation, as you mentioned, Ryan, or other technology-based solutions that we can bring in to the diabetes technology landscape. So I said a lot, so I'm just going to pause there.
No worries.
And I'm excited to hear from others too.
Just if I could ask one more follow-up question with the task force, is part of the task force the responsibilities to include some sort of a lived experience user testing group that evaluates not only the accessibility but also the usability of the device? That's often in Canada anyway where we trip up, is we have lots of technical testing that happens and things seem to go well, but as soon as we look at the lived experience from a usability standpoint, things tend to fall apart as it relates to technology.
Yes, thanks for that question. I can speak at Tandem. Our behavioral sciences division encompasses our human factors team, which is responsible for doing all of the in-lab usability testing that you just mentioned. But the other part of our team that we've been building up is the part that studies and measures and evaluates real-world lived experiences with the devices. And so we're continuing to hire more and more, again, social scientists and people who specialize in human-computer interaction to be responsible for measuring and evaluating real-world use. And what we'll be doing this week is exactly that. The task force members who are coming to join us will be demonstrating what it's like for them, in their everyday lives to be using their systems. So yes, that exactly.
Okay, wonderful. I appreciate the answer to that question. I'm going to go over to Dr. Abouhassan now. How do assumptions and or knowledge gaps in the medical community, in your opinion, impact how people with disabilities, including sight loss, access care for their diabetes? And as a follow-up, how do these assumptions affect individuals' management of their diabetes over time?
I think just from, first of all, my name is Dr. Abouhassan. I'm an endocrinologist here in Windsor. I'm mostly visually impaired, so I deal with some of these issues myself. So I think just in general, I think until you're visually impaired or you deal with someone visually impaired on a regular basis, you might not understand the difficulties they have in terms of seeing things or in terms of mobility, getting around and stuff like that. So I think that's probably the biggest gap that probably people who don't have a disability, sort of a visual impairment, might not understand, is how much you miss out in terms of not seeing well, in terms of having access to medical device or medical information, that kind of stuff. And mobility is also a big issue in that sense. In terms of the insulin pump, I think before we didn't see that many patients on insulin pump, but over time, ADP has covered insulin pump originally just for teenagers or patients under 18, but now they've covered it for people over 18. So in terms of clinical practice, we see a lot more patients on insulin pumps now, right? And so because of the funding that goes along with it, and now that CGMs are also being covered by ADP, so we see a lot more of that being covered. In terms of people who don't have disability or just diabetics in general, they have difficulty with pumps because it's technically there's some aspects that they have to understand about it. When you add that they're visually impaired, if someone's visually impaired, they have the difficulty of trying to understand the technical parts of the pump without having the vision to sort of help them, guide them through what's going on with their pump. And that could be sort of a safety issue. So I think the safety issue is more concerning with people with visual pumps because they can't just rely on looking at the pump and seeing what's going on if there's pump being pumped out, or sorry, if insulin's being pumped out or not, or if the sugars are jumping up and down. So these are some things that in terms of safety have to be sort of included with the insulin pump if you're talking with people with visual disabilities.
It's an interesting point, Dr. Abouhassan, only because during the pandemic, we heard a lot from our community about people that would otherwise have other human beings help them administer their daily insulin. And in a world of isolation, they couldn't have neighbors at one point during the pandemic knocking on their doors and coming within, in order to read the CGM, you need to have someone closer than 2 feet apart from you to help you read it. So we instantly saw this surge of people desperately trying to find assistance to read their insulin pumps at a time where they weren't really supposed to be socializing with anyone. And I think your point around the age makes a difference as well, because just on assumptions, I believe that the medical community, in the shape of diabetes and retinopathy for the most part being something many seniors deal with, there's an assumption that someone else is at home or at their residence to help them. And that's not always the case, especially with working age adults, some of our younger diabetes members of our community that have diabetes, and most especially in First Nation communities where we know diabetic retinopathy is very high as well. So I appreciate you pulling out those really important points.
The other point I'd like to make too is that, being on insulin pump also helps improve microvascular complications. So like in terms of improving your vision, in terms of improving peripheral neuropathy, preventing dialysis, insulin pumps have been shown to sort of improve those outcomes. So that's another one, that accessibility also helps them in their long-term health goals.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. So that's a little bit about the current, what we're dealing with today. Let's talk a bit more about the situation at hand. Dr. Steph Habif, we'll go back to you. How have manufacturers engaged people with disabilities to understand the existing barriers and potential benefits, to Dr. Abouhassan's point earlier, to develop solutions to address them? I know we talked a little bit about what Diabetes Tandem is doing, but is there, in general, are you seeing manufacturers engaging more or less? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So we already talked about this a little bit. A couple of the teams that are a part of my crew at Tandem are the ones who run all of our in-lab usability testing. As most of you know, by being a regulated medical device company, we are responsible for delivering tranches of evidence to regulatory bodies to prove out the safety and the efficacy of our systems. Just because something is safe and effective to use doesn't mean it's optimally usable. And so that's where really understanding the people we're designing for and how across different cohorts amongst our populations needs differ. So in this case, whether it has to do with understanding the needs of folks with visual impairment and the diversity within that group of people, or whether it's somebody, for example, where English is a second language, and we have to deal with we have to tend to literacy needs. These are the types of examples of where companies like mine need to continue to do the work to be more engaged in order to understand what it's going to mean to effectively be relevant in the everyday lives of somebody who requires subcutaneous insulin. An interesting statistic in the United States, the penetration of insulin pump therapy in the United States has, over the past, call it 5-ish years, held pretty steady at between 35 to 40%. So of all the people with insulin intensive diabetes in the United States, let's say at the end of 2022, 40% of those folks are using some kind of insulin pump device. In order to continue to, as people in business like to say, further penetrate the market, or as I like to say, how might we earn the trust and the business of more people with insulin intensive diabetes? That means understanding these particular types of needs and designing for those needs. And so if a company like mine wants to further our relevance in the everyday lives of people with insulin intensive diabetes, which we do very much, this is the type of work we need to be doing. You shared, Angela, at the beginning, some pretty impressive statistics related to the correlation of visual impairment to diabetes. And so for us, that means continuing to observe and measure real-world experiences, find business-to-business opportunities with other technology companies to make relevant, for example, voice-activated or voice automation. That's just one example. And then, of course, continuing to do all of those usability studies to optimize the safety.
Thank you for that. I think what we find very often when we're looking at technology-based accessible solutions, is that what works for the community who's blind or partially sighted often helps in the same way multiple sensory related disabilities. And so I would encourage the scope to be not as niche as for one disability, but it could be one solution for millions of people. And unfortunately, sometimes we go into rabbit holes when we're looking at solutions, when I think in this day and age, it's a lot easier to find one solution for the many, especially in this area. So I'll kick it back over to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just really going to add to that, something that Tandem and other companies in the diabetes technology industries have been doing is continuing to bolster the number of individuals inside the company that are dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so why that matters is for what you just said. If my team, for instance, is going to do a deep dive with folks who are visually impaired to understand how to meet those needs, by having experts who specialize in inclusive design and diversity, we make sure that we don't go down those rabbit holes too deeply. On the one hand, we need to go down the rabbit hole because we really need to granularly understand needs. Right. But what you're talking about is how do you apply then the insights to designs that can meet the needs of the most number of people. So I agree.
And that are truly universal in their nature.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Ryan, I'm going to come over to you now. What considerations influenced your decision when choosing an insulin pump? And were there specific concerns that arose when you were making that decision?
I like the question. So when I chose to go on an insulin pump, I really chose to really look at my diabetes management a little bit differently. And that's not to say I wasn't keeping good care of myself, but I really got into the carb counting. I really got into the exercise, the running, the things like that. And I'm like, well, what's the difference, right? So again, I'm not a medical professional, but when you're taking insulin through a pen, I give a shot at 8 in the morning, 3 hours later, that insulin's gone. So if I choose not to eat lunch, or if I choose, if I'm not eating, then I'm not going to give myself insulin, but I'm not going to have any in my system, and that's not good either. Whereas with the pump, it's a continuous drip, almost like an IV of insulin. And that was very appealing to me because it would be less of a, dare I say, roller coaster ride. It'd be more level to keep my sugars at a granular level and equal them out. So that was a huge thing for me. And becoming more active, I wanted more of the continuous drip rather than the roller coaster of insulin that I was kind of on. And plus, I would only have to give myself one shot of insulin a day, or one type of insulin a day, I should say, rather than two. And it would be one needle prick every, let's say, 3 days, because you have your infusion site, rather than 4 a day where I'd be doing insulin pen. Plus, I have a big sweet tooth, and everything is good in moderation. I could have a piece of cake, then I just couldn't eat the whole cake, right? Whereas if I was on, insulin shots, it's a little bit more difficult to kind of gauge that how quickly the sugar is going to turn into hit your blood system and things like that. Whereas the pump kind of overtook that, and then it was just, I guess, the fear I had was, when I walked into the room, and my diabetes nurses and educators, who were great and totally changed the approach once they realized that I was visually impaired, and how they taught me to use the pump, we didn't realize that it was all visual until I went in there. And then we sort of had to make tweaks, and there were some options available, but it was making the best of a bad situation. You have this great, tens of $1,000s worth of pump in your hand, but you can only use certain functions of it, right? It was like, oh my goodness, this is a fancy insulin pen, which no doubt enhanced my diabetes management, but there's still work to be done. I think with the, as people have said already on the call, you can make an app, you can do all kinds of different things. We do everything from our phone, so why can't we control an insulin pump from our phone? I think the conversations are happening, and I think that we're moving in the right direction. I would just love to see it work a little faster, but I know that that's not always how things work.
Well, that's why we're here today. Hopefully we can help push the pedal to the metal as much as we can in these types of scenarios. Dr. Abouhassan, if you could tell us, what tools and/or strategies do you support patients with diabetes and sight loss do you use to support patients with diabetes and sight loss in your practice? And would access to insulin pumps impact or address those needs?
To be honest with you, I only have 2 patients with visually impaired that are on a pump. Most people who are visually impaired do not, it's too much for them, right? Especially if they're older and they're not really sort of definitely sound, they don't. So I only have a couple of patients that are on insulin pumps that are visually impaired. And, you know, there's always a safety issue that goes along with that, and they're sort of that way. So what was the second part of your question?
Would better access to insulin pumps impact and address the needs that come with the manual delivery of insulin right now, as you see it within your patients that have sight loss?
Oh, definitely. It's just like Ryan was saying. So with the pump, you have more flexibility in terms of, so if you break your day down into when you're at work or when you're at school, when you're at home and when you're sleeping, you need different insulin requirements at that time. And the pump allows you to have that flexibility. So if you decide to go for a run, you can cut back on your insulin. If you're at work and it's very strenuous work, you can cut back on your insulin. If you're eating something like, say, for example, pizza that has a lot of cheese and fat in it, you can change the insulin bolus to fit that profile. You know, when you have like the dawn effect, like in the morning when your sugars are higher because you release cortisol, you can compensate for that. So having an insulin pump is a great tool for a lot of patients. I have probably 200 patients with type 1 diabetes in my practice. 100 of them are on the pump, 100 of them are not on the pump. So some of the reasons why people are not on the pump, one, they don't like to be attached to a device, just as a personal preference. 2, sometimes they get calluses. So when you have an insertion site for the sensors and an insertion site for your pump, they develop calluses and it sort of becomes painful for them, or they don't absorb the insulin as well. That sometimes becomes an issue and they take a break for that reason. So like I said before, we're seeing a lot more pumps because, you know, children are started on pumps and they continue those pumps as they become adults. Sometimes they get adults, they stop using them. But the vast majority of people we get now into our practice from the pediatric program are on a pump. And I think they just like the flexibility that goes along with it. There's also other features that go along with it in terms of we're getting close to that sort of automatic insulin delivery, and the pump and the meter are talking to each other, the sensors are talking to each other, so that when you're getting low blood sugars, it can actually disable your insulin pump. That's sort of a new feature. So again, in terms of safety, you know, that's something that people who are on a pump have access to, where if you're not on the pump, you wouldn't have access to it. So in terms of the flexibility and the extra safety features, it's a great option for type 1 diabetics. But like I said, not all type 1 diabetics are on a pump.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We talk a lot at CNIB when we're working with our community about this concept of the cognitive load. And, you know, if the preference is to use a medical device, you know, to administer insulin, that in many cases can help offset that cognitive load, the constantly needing to be aware of when it's time to administer. Am I going to have that extra piece of cake? Did I have the pizza? In addition to, you know, how will my guide dog and I now go from the pizza staff party into a ride share that'll I'll be refused on, and then I have to plan. So you can see how this is integral to as many things as we can help to do that takes a load off, that helps to lessen the cognitive load for the community we serve. I think will go a long way, but your notable personal preference is absolutely valid. But for those who it is what they want to do, they should be able to use it with a high degree of trust.
For sure. And your point is well taken, the point you made earlier about in terms of just not narrowing on just on visual impairment, right? Because there's other people who have other disabilities, learning disabilities, and sort of that way. Cognitive disabilities that if you could develop a strategy that can work for someone visually impaired, it would also benefit someone who's, say, having cognitive disabilities or, you know, in terms of other issues, disabilities.
Yeah. Think about Alzheimer's, dementia. I mean, the list goes on and on as well. I'm going to stay with you, Dr. Abouhassan, and ask what role do you believe the medical community and frontline healthcare professionals play in the advancement of accessible insulin pumps?
I think advocacy, right? In terms, we have to advocate for our patients, right? In terms of that aspect of it, right? So, again, you know, a lot of physicians might not know like that there is this issue, or that they can't see a way that the patient could benefit from that, because they they can, but if they can see someone like Ryan or some of our other patients that sort of can manage their pump and safely do it, I think they would be more motivated to sort of help in that aspect, right? So I think that right now most endocrinologists or physicians would be hesitant to start someone who's visually impaired because they think there's a safety issue, right? That's even people who aren't visually impaired sort of have a load for them. If you're visually impaired, it might be. So I think advocating for them to have that accessibility is probably the best way for now, right? So I think once we have that accessibility where we feel there's a pump out there that's safe for someone who's visually impaired to use, then I think they would sort of move that way. But it's sort of like a chicken and egg. It's hard for someone to push for something when they know it might not be safe for the patient at this time.
Thank you so much. Dr. Habif, I'm going to come back to you. How have recent innovations in digital tech created new opportunities for the design of an accessible insulin pump? And have new technologies and innovations also created new challenges and barriers? You talked a little bit about the regulation side of things that we need to be cognizant of. So sort of anything above and beyond what you've already mentioned is by way of new technologies, and maybe a little bit more about some of the barriers we can anticipate so that we can help get ahead of them so that they don't become, I guess if they're obstacles today, we don't let them become barriers tomorrow.
Great question. Thanks. We have mentioned a few of them already. Voice control, certainly smartphone or tablet app interfaces kind of changes the opportunity and the digital landscape for sharing information and allowing a digital interface for diabetes management. Here in the United States, just a few months ago, we made available an updated version of the Tandem diabetes system to include a smartphone-based app feature that when you connect your smartphone to your insulin pump, you can deliver your bolus insulin from your smartphone. And we purposely, I'll call it a baby steps approach, where I think everybody in the world wants to be able to manage their whole life sort of from their smartphone. That's a grand statement, right? Like, of course, not everybody, right? Like, so you mentioned trust earlier. Trust in technology is something I study a lot and have studied a lot. And for instance, we hear from parents that they have concerns related to opening up the hardware and software landscape that goes into managing diabetes. But just to give you an example of being regulated and why it does take some time. So now we have this version of our system that allows people to connect their personal smartphone to their insulin pump, which really could have huge impacts related to designing for inclusion and keeping accessibility in mind. But it also requires, for instance, when it comes to smartphones, what we call a compatibility strategy, where when you're regulated, you have to design it in such a way where you outline specifically which models and which types of smartphones can connect to the insulin pump. And the reason for that is many, one of which, for example, is cybersecurity. And making sure that whatever devices are involved with delivering subcutaneous insulin are secure. And so when we took this first step with the FDA here in the United States to make available a smartphone-based bolus delivery option, we did that as a first step because what we're marching towards is a full smartphone-enabled insulin delivery device, where, again, you don't have to buy another hardware, you don't have to buy another PDM or smartphone. You can just use your personal smartphone like you do for your banking or managing the appliances in your house or whatever to now deliver insulin, because the smartphone, your personal smartphone, will talk to the pump system that's delivering your insulin. But there were so many things we needed to learn and navigate with the agency, which we did in collaboration with the FDA here at the United States, which sets the entire industry up to know what things need to be in place in order for that to be as available to as many people as possible. The third part of the diabetes technology frontier that I find extraordinarily exciting and study ad nauseum is the automation. You heard the wonderful healthcare provider who's here with us during this call mention automated insulin delivery systems. I don't know how many people on the call are the types of personalities where if somebody handed you the opportunity to step into a fully automated self-driving car, you would happily, with no hesitation, get into that car, push a button, and let the car do everything. There are some people who would do that and not even think twice. There are a lot of other people who need a moment to develop trust in that automation. And there's a really great story around how here in the United States, it took our society over 50 years to trust an elevator, a fully automated lift, 50 years to fully trust that automation. And so now that we're in this land of automated insulin delivery, how do we design for trust? How do we design for as many people as possible understanding a person's capability and needs when it comes to how what sort of workflows they use during a day to get that insulin delivered? Should it be as simple as just pushing a button, setting and forgetting, and letting the machine do everything? We're not quite there yet, but we could be. And how do we make it most successful for our human users? And so I think automation is a really exciting frontier that holds the promise of alleviating the burdens that come along with diabetes management.
It's a great topic, and we could probably spend the rest of our time thinking about what the automation side of thing is. I think this community has been very close to the automated autonomous vehicle, and to your point, yes, there are those who'll be very comfortable getting into one tomorrow, but I think it's about choice. And I think at the end of the day, as long as we're not making any assumptions around where our community will land on the availability of the automated piece versus not, I think that's all we can ask for at this point, because no two people have the same lived experience, and no two people will have the exact same requirements from an intersectionality standpoint as it relates to their lived experience from sight loss and diabetes and maybe other things that are other challenges that are ongoing in their lives. So I think as long as there's choice, we'll find camps that are very happy to jump in one of the many areas that we'll be able to come up with as far as technological advances go. Just being cognizant of time, I would like to leave sort of the last word to Ryan, if possible, and then we are going to open up the chat so that if there are questions, we can have them addressed to our panelists. Ryan, you will close us off. What do you think would be the most significant improvement in the accessibility and usability of diabetes management for people who are blind or partially sighted?
I think getting that first pump on the market. I mean, I think the goal is to let's have one and let's see how it does. But I think the dream is to have every single pump be accessible out there. And I think that that's just the start. I think we can even branch out. I know this whole call is about the inaccessibility of insulin pumps, but there's so many medical devices out there that are not accessible. So I think that making accessibility mandatory in all medical devices would be something that we should strive towards. Myself, I'd love to, in my lifetime, use a pump and not have the fear of making my schedule around my friends or family so that they can help me out just in case something goes wrong. I would really like to even just know how much battery is left in my pump. So just having all of the information available, not just part of it, I think is really what I would love to see. And I think I've noticed a couple names on the call we've had that are also going through the same sort of things with the diabetic retinopathy and the vision loss and being a pump user. We've talked at length about some of the experiences that we've had, and I think they would vouch for that in the same.
Thanks, Ryan. I think before we open it up for the chat, what I'll say to our panelists is that we have, I don't think there is one device that will be the solution for everyone in every way, shape, or form. I think that technology often does the one thing we know it will do, and it does fail from time to time. So there are solutions where we can connect our community in the event that from either an AI or a connecting to a live individual through some technology that we're looking at very closely in various collaborations that could be part of the solution as it relates to the launching of the first, if you will, accessible pump, to Ryan's point. So we're in this together. We can't just point to the manufacturers, the medical community, and say it's on you. But if we do have the regulation in place, then it makes it a lot easier for us to know that whatever comes forward will have crossed important thresholds in its development and will be ready for us to be part of that collaborative discussion. I want to thank my panelists for joining us today in this discussion, and I want to now open up the chat and invite people to ask questions. I'm just going to ask Thomas for some help here if we've got any raised hands or people in the chat box.
Hi, Angela, it's Thomas. So if folks have a question, they can raise hand. Again, for those using Zoom shortcuts, to raise or lower hand, that's Alt-Y. And if you're on the phone, that's *9. We have Vicky.
Hi. I just wanted to say I don't have a pump, but I use the Libre 2, and I just find it amazing. I've just been using it for about 6 months, and I just find it so much easier monitoring my sugars, highs and lows, and just being aware all the time what different foods are doing. So I'm just amazed at that. So if the doctors could be more informed about that they know, I pretty well had to educate my own doctor about it. So.
No, for sure. Vicky, do you use the voice activated version of it? Do you know that you can actually scan it and it'll tell you audibly what your blood sugars are? So it'll actually tell you without even you looking at it. Do you know that or no?
Yes, I hook it up to my iPhone because it won't work with the reader that came with it, but
Right.
it will work with my iPhone.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's really awesome.
It's interesting, Vicky, the education patients sometimes do have to, the self-advocacy piece is not one that that we will miss here. That is really important as part of the discussion with the medical community. Tommy. Hi, Tommy Lund. Long time no chat. You're on.
Oh, hi. Hi, sorry. I'm going to lower my hand. I also put this on chat, but one of the concerns that I always come across with participants are the costs, because some of the devices, they do add up. Is like, how much do these devices, when they're available or now, do they cost? And is there any kind of advocacy effort in kind of making that more affordable as well for seniors and people living with different challenges?
These devices are covered under ADP, assisted device programs. So most of them are covered. Some of the supplies are not covered, and sometimes there's a gap there. But the vast majority is covered under assisted device programs, whether it's the pump or the sensors that go along with them.
Thank you, Dr. Abouhassan, for addressing that question. I think moving forward, if we do have an accessible pump hit the market, we're going to have to make sure we address the question of availability and affordability with our friends at ADP as well, which, as you know, isn't always a streamlined discussion. Louise.
Yes,
Hi.
speaking of, hi, nice to see you again.
Nice to
Speaking
meet
of ADP, most places do not have an ADP program. So especially in the Atlantic region, very few are able to access anything that is any kind of technology that you have to pay for. So it would be out of bounds. So that's, I think, a big place that we have to work in advocacy, is to ensure that all provinces across Canada have equal benefits in all accessibility technology that is available or will be in the future. And I know in Atlantic Canada, there are quite a number of people who have diabetes, and their need would be great, and majority would not be able to afford because they don't necessarily have insurance programs from employment or past employment. Just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Just to clarify, so if you have a diabetes education center, which most major cities have, so usually there's a diabetes education center in most cities, and most of them are ADP funded. So you don't have to actually go to ADP. It's usually the diabetes education. So they usually have a nurse there. And that's how it usually works out to get funding, is that you have a diabetes education center. They have a nurse that specializes in pumps, and they'll help you get through the paperwork. So it's not, you don't have to actually go through ADP, like the sort of, I know how you have to sort of travel to them. The nurse will assess you whether you qualify or not.
But still in
Yeah.
Eastern Canada, that is still not available for many things. You have to be very high risk, I guess, and an option that you might be able to get, but majority of people would not be able to access it here. It's still.
Okay.
It's
Yeah, thank
Ryan
you.
here. Yeah, ADP is just in Ontario, unfortunately, and that's, I know one thing our friends at Diabetes Canada are fighting towards is getting a framework that will cover such items across the nation. Fingers crossed. So we're working well with them as well.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comment from the group? We still do have a few minutes, or I could ask our panelists to give us with some other closing thoughts, depending on whether or not we have any more hands up.
I'd just like to make one point before we
Yes.
before we head out. It's funny, if you talk to Ryan and other people who are on insulin pumps, they're usually on the older pumps because it's easier for them to sort of navigate. As the newer pumps have come out, and getting back to Dr. Habif's story about in terms of cybersecurity, it sometimes limits how much they can use of the pump. And that's something that sort of has, one thing I want to note is that although we worry so much about cybersecurity, it also can also be a limitation for people in terms of accessibility. And that has been sort of a problem. So I have a patient, I've talked to other patients that sort of stay with their older pump, even though it's not as beneficial in terms of newer pumps, just because the accessibility is a little bit better. They have more ways of sort of using it to their benefit.
Well, I think Ryan's story right from the top underpins that in that he has had the same device for 11 years. And I'm sure there's perhaps something out there that might be a bit more advanced, maybe not, but it's not accessible. It's not an option for him. So,
And I say Ryan's not the only one. Most patients who are vision impaired usually use an older device. And that way, we were talking about the security. Most of them, they try to use the newer security because they can't jailbreak it. They can't sort of get accessibility to it. They sort of don't want to use it anymore, or just put away and use their older one.
okay, I think that's it for questions right now. Dr. Steph Habif, do you have any closing thoughts before we remind people about a petition and say our goodbyes?
I was simply going to thank everybody on the call for spending time today on this topic. It's a critical topic and one that we care a lot about. And we're very excited for our few days with our accessible insulin pump task force members this week here in San Diego. And I know that this organization is doing a lot to drive changes. So thank you for that. And we are always interested in hearing feedback at Tandem. So anybody's welcome to reach out to me with comments or questions. I'd be happy to take them later.
Well, thank you for that. And we're always happy to consult, especially if we get an invite to sunny San Diego. I'm looking at Louise all the way in the East Coast right now. I think we could go out there. Couldn't we, Louise? That'd be fun.
We certainly could. I'm looking forward to it.
There you go. I'd like to thank our panelists today for sharing their time and thoughts with us, and for all of you for taking the time out to join us. I think we can see from this panel that a solution absolutely is possible, and we will continue to advocate until we see real changes in accessible medical care. And the buck doesn't stop at accessible insulin pumps, by the way. This is just the tip of the iceberg. A reminder that Thomas has now put the link back in our petition in the chat. I would appreciate all of you to sign it, and also ask a few more people to do the same. So that we can hold the government of Canada accountable to some of the next steps and require a conversation with us over this. Thank you to our friends. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. I know we have Rosalie and oh my goodness, why is the other name escaping? Two wonderful ASL interpreters with us today, keeping up with this lively discussion. Our gratitude goes out to you. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and I really hope there's more to come. So let's keep the conversation going. Let's sign that petition. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.